Michael Robbins is the president and chief executive officer at the Association of Uncrewed Vehicle Systems International, or AUVSI, the world's largest trade association for uncrewed systems, autonomy, and robotics in both the commercial and defense sectors. He joined AUVSI in 2020 and previously served as chief advocacy officer and an executive vice president. In 2015, he co-founded a business consulting firm named Intrepid. AUVSI was an Intrepid client. Prior, Michael was managing director of government and public affairs at the Airline Pilots Association International, that people in the know as ALPA, ALPA. Before ALPA, Michael spent a decade in the office of the late U.S. Congressman John Dingell. I'm not sure if I pronounced it right, so
Dingle.
Okay, you'll help me with that.
Yeah.
Out of Michigan, where he was chief of staff at that office. Michael serves on the META Corporation Aviation Advisory Committee. We talked about that at one time, what META is. Amazing facility. National Advanced Mobility Consortium Advisory Committee. He co-chaired the Federal Administration's UAS Detection and Mitigation Aviation Rulemaking Committee. Currently, Michael serves on the United States Department of Transportation's Aviation Supply Chain Risk Task Force and the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency Critical Infrastructure Partner Council for SUAS Security Working Group. That's a mouthful, Michael.
They just shut it down, so I got to remove that.
It really is, and I blew one word. You're on the advisory council.
Yeah.
Michael holds a bachelor degree from the University of Michigan and a master's degree from Georgetown University, and is an officer in the United States Navy Reserve. Michael, please take it away.
All right. Thank you, John, for that, for the introduction, and thank you to the Empire chapter for having me. I'm privileged to be here and to spend some time with you, and thank you for taking time out of your Tuesday night. I'm going to talk for a little bit, and and then we'll get into maybe more of a dialogue, but just a real quick overview. I think most of you are probably very familiar with AUVSI. Been around since 1952 and gone through many different iterations. I'm sorry, 1972, many iterations. But in our 52nd year, now really focused on being the industrial trade association for autonomy. We see ourselves as the tip of the spear for industry, and our mission is to move to points of friction and to help solve problems. And right now, a lot of those points of friction are in the policy and regulatory domain, which is where I'll spend most of my time discussing today. But of course, we do other things. John talked about our events. We have a lot of events throughout the year. We're best known for Exponential. In fact, we're so well known for Exponential, a lot of people, when they're going to Exponential, say, I'm on my way to AUVSI. I'm going to AUVSI, because for a long time, the show was just called AUVSI. But I think it went under our rebranding before my time, before I started. And of course, this year we're launching Exponential Europe as well. So next February, as you saw on the schedule there, or this upcoming February, next month, in Düsseldorf, Germany. We also have our upcoming drone and AAM symposium event that we're hosting at Nationals Park this year. So if you're a baseball fan, it'll be a very cool venue in Washington, D.C. And then we'll have a series of defense events throughout the year, including, as John profiled, the Army Worldwide Security Conference in March. And then we'll have a co-located AUVSI defense event at Exponential. And then we'll do one in the fall in the DC area as well. We also do some research where we're providing business intelligence and data back to the industry and to government. We're probably best known for our Uncrewed Systems and Robotics database, which is an open source platform that catalogs virtually, if not every unclassified, uncrewed platform in the world. I think there's now nearly 7,000 platforms in that. We also do a lot of education. This year, we're launching a scholarship program, which I'm very excited about. It's actually inspired by another chapter, the Pathfinder chapter down in Huntsville, Alabama. They've had a successful scholarship program for a number of years, and we proposed to our board of directors that we should do one at AUVSI National as well. So we're getting that stood up right now. We're going through the paperwork process. And of course we've got 32 chapters I think right now around the world, most of them here in the US, and then one international in Israel. And then tomorrow night, actually around the same time, I'll be on the phone with some folks in Australia that are interested in opening an AVSI chapter in Australia, which could be very cool. And of course we're all domain, air, ground, maritime, commercial defense. So it's a really big portfolio for us. I'll spend most of my time today talking about the air domain because I think based upon the people I know anyway on the call, that's where I think a lot of your businesses are. But I'll touch just briefly on the maritime and ground domains as well. And if you have other questions, I can dig into them. On the ground side, right now we're very focused at both the state and federal level. At the state level, it's largely trying to ensure states remain open and are working with autonomy companies to help them enable operations at the state level. It's really state by state. It's a patchwork right now. You've got some states that are really leaning into autonomous operations. I was just in Phoenix last week, and everywhere I went in an autonomous Waymo. Awesome experience, and really validates the fact that autonomy is not like this future thing. It's very real. I got out of the airport, called the Waymo on my phone, got in the Waymo at the airport, took me to my hotel the next morning. I had a couple of meetings. Waymo took me there. All my whole trip in Phoenix, I took Waymo, and it was great. Never had a human driver. Um, but that's unique to Phoenix, and we're frequently working with states to try and ensure that they're open to autonomy, and at the same time working at the federal level to try and get a national framework for autonomy and automated driving set, so that there's federal preemption over states that have banned autonomy. The states that have banned it are largely doing so in conjunction working with labor unions that are concerned about the loss of Teamster jobs or TWU jobs or such. So that's something that we're having to overcome. On the maritime domain, we spent a lot of time on shipbuilding concerns. We're actually testifying before Congress on maritime issues next Wednesday before the House Transportation Infrastructure Committee, the Coast Guard Subcommittee, to talk about maritime infrastructure. The Coast Guard right now undergoing a big transformation. As you may have seen, the four-star commandant of the Coast Guard was relieved of command last week. And so they're going to be undergoing a pretty big transformation. AUVSI is going to try and help shape that to the extent that we can to get more uncrewed and autonomous platforms incorporated into the Coast Guard's plan. The Coast Guard has a huge mandate for maritime domain awareness and security protection, and uncrewed systems really could help be a force multiplier for an otherwise struggling element of the service right now. And then, of course, we're very concerned about our shipbuilding capacity nationally. There was a time not too many decades ago where the world was the leader, U.S. was the world leader in shipbuilding. Today, we are near the bottom of major industrial countries in shipbuilding, and China, our primary peer adversary, has about 232 times more shipbuilding capacity than the U.S. So that's obviously of great concern as a naval officer, but also just as a citizen. If we were to get into, God forbid, a protracted conflict with China, their ability to replenish their industry far outpaces our ability, and that's across all domains, but it's particularly acute in shipbuilding. It's probably also very acute in small UAS as well. And that's a real concern. I mean, if you read history and read World War II, the commander of the attack on Pearl Harbor, Admiral Yamamoto, was actually opposed to the attack on Pearl Harbor because he had spent time living in the U.S. and knew the industrial strength of the U.S. and knew that if Japan went to war with the U.S., if they didn't have a decapitating strike on their first shot, that they would lose a protracted war because of the industrial strength of the U.S. fast forward 80 years later, the U.S. is not in the driver's seat on industrial capacity. So that's something that we really have to focus on, and we look forward to testifying on shipbuilding next Tuesday. And then in the air domain, this is where we spend obviously a lot of our time. I think it's where you spend a lot of your time. And for us, it comes across in a lot of different spaces. Obviously, we work very closely with the FAA on the integration of drones and advanced air mobility aircraft. And as John mentioned, we also work in the UAS detection and mitigation space as well. I led the FAA's rulemaking committee, as he noted, on that in 2023 and 2024. And this is a story. It's a good news story overall. Where we are as an industry is no longer a technology problem. It's now a regulatory problem. The technology is there. We're ready for integrating drones. We're ready to integrate advanced air mobility. But the enabling regulations to allow us to really operate in this country are not there yet. So we spend a lot of time talking to Congress, talking to the FAA, the DOT, and at the state and local level as well about the need to have the enabling regulations in place to allow the U.S. to maintain global leadership in the air. And just briefly on the drone side, we've been collectively, all of us, working towards the Beyond Visual Line of Sight rule for many years. As you know, the rulemaking committee, the BVLOS ARC, submitted its report in March of 2022. So coming up on 3 years, and still we don't have a rule. We got very close to a draft rule at the end of the Biden administration, but there were some holdups at the Department of Transportation, and the rule didn't get across the finish line. So we actually sent a letter today. I think I can maybe link to it later. I sent a letter to the Office of Management and Budget, which now sort of is in the lead in the rulemaking process, asking them to expedite the rule, since it is still just a draft, and to not have this rule, which was at the finish line, be held up through the broader regulatory review process. So we're hoping to get that expedited in the near future. Tied to that rule is the 2209 rule, which we've been waiting for since 2016. That's also a draft at this point, and that is designated fixed sites around the country as critical infrastructure in areas where drones should not be operated, which could help lead to prevent situations like what we had over the last couple of weeks in New York and New Jersey, where you had sort of temporary TFRs sort of thrown up without really a whole lot of regard to the implications of putting those up. Instead, this is going to fix certain sites, whether it's an NFL stadium or a nuclear power plant or something else that's sensitive as a no-fly zone, and have that permanently in place. That's something that Congress directed the FAA to do again back in 2016, and they still haven't done it. So that's causing a lot of consternation. And one of the issues that we run into sometimes is when we're trying to fight for the enabling rules, like Beyond Visual Line of Sight rule, the fact that we don't necessarily have all the security rules in place holds up the enabling rules, because you have objections raised by Department of Homeland Security, sometimes Department of Justice, and others in the national security, national intelligence side, that have concerns about rogue drones or concerns about the U.S. ability to mitigate those drones. So that's something that we spend a lot of time working on. But of course, we all know the really positive use cases of drones, and we're seeing that in situations like drones being used for public safety, drones as first responder, search and rescue, all the great work the drones did, in response to hurricanes Helene and Milton. And we're very bullish on the future of the drone industry. We're seeing the FAA starting to move forward with waivers much more aggressively in the last 18 months than they had in the previous 10 years combined. And we're seeing the actual execution in Dallas of a test site. They're calling it the Key site, with utilizing uncrewed traffic management software for strategic deconfliction, which is fantastic, because UTM really is the future of we believe is the future of the broader ATC, but certainly starting with drones, and then working its way up into advanced air mobility and ultimately other higher altitude traffic. And then in the advanced air mobility space, we got a special federal aviation regulation last year for advanced air mobility, eVTOLs, electric vertical takeoff and landing. It's a good first step. It's not great. It's by no means mission accomplished. It certainly laid out a pathway for operations, but certainly also put in place some really challenging barriers for industry that are some of which are probably not safety based, but are really more bureaucracy based. So we still have a lot of work to do on that space. We don't have a final engineering brief for what vertiports are going to look like. That's something we're still working through with the Office of Airports, which is without leadership right now. I'll come back to that. And as well as a challenge with certification, which is going very, very, very slowly for advanced air mobility, which is something we've seen with the drones as well. And again, no one leading the certification office. And I'll just speak to that in a moment. For now, I guess we have a challenge with the FAA right now where we have a massive void of leadership. Obviously, there's no FAA administrator at the moment. There's no deputy administrator at the moment. There's not an FAA head of air safety. There's not a head of certification, as I mentioned. There's not a head of what was the other one I was just talking about? Sorry, long day of airports. Airports is vacant as well. So you've got multiple major offices within the FAA with no one in charge, and that when that happens, nothing gets done. Rank and file employees tend not to do much. Not that they're not doing work, but they're not making final decisions. And they don't have that top cover from leadership. So that's a real problem. So we're working with the Trump transition team, the DOT landing team. Secretary Duffy was confirmed today as DOT secretary, so we'll get on his schedule in the near future to try and bring about permanent leadership into the FAA at the top with the FAA administrator, so that the other key staff positions can be filled, because those won't be filled until the top position is filled. So that's something that's got to happen and needs to be a top priority. At the state level, as hopefully we have two 50-state campaigns, one focused on drones and one focused on advanced air mobility. Drone Prepared and Advanced Air Mobility Prepared, respectively. AAM Prepared was introduced today in Arizona, so that trip to Phoenix last week paid off. And we're confident that we're going to continue to see a number of states adopting those legislation. We've had a number adopt both drone and AM prepared, and some states adopt one or the other. And really what those are is those are coordination efforts to ensure that states recognize that airspace is federal, and that they themselves should not be regulating the airspace, and B, that there's significant economic opportunity to attracting these industries to their state, and real opportunity to build out a significant workforce. So it's a way of helping the states coordinate their activities in these spaces with all levels of government. And we're really excited about the success we've had in those campaigns over the last 2 years. We also have a broader campaign that is focused on drone competitiveness. It's called the Partnership for Drone Competitiveness, and our effort there is to promote U.S. and allied nation leadership in the drone space. Obviously, this is as mentioned, this is a space where U.S. is in particularly far behind, and a lot of other countries are as well. As most people in this industry know, that the small UAS market is dominated by the People's Republic of China, and through their Made in China 2025 initiative, where they sought to globally dominate a number of industries, including drones. They've had great success with that. They flooded the global market with very, very inexpensive but very capable drones. Many of which have very real security concerns, which have been recognized by multiple different federal agencies, including the FBI, DoD, CISA, Department of Justice, and others. And we believe that the best way to transition off of Chinese drones is through a combination of incentives for U.S. companies and our allies to be able to scale domestic manufacturing. Through tax incentives, through grants, through loan guarantees, as we've seen with other industries, like with solar panels and advanced batteries, chips, and the CHIPS Act, which has certainly got a lot of ink. That works very well. combined with a dedicated timeline to transition off of Chinese drones. We don't support immediate bans. We think bans that immediately ground Chinese drones are counterproductive and do not recognize the investments that that many American companies and public safety agencies have made in drones. And we oppose, immediate bans, but do support efforts to transition off of Chinese drones on a sensible timeline. And then, as I mentioned, we are a commercial and defense. So I've talked mostly about commercial applications. I talked a little bit at the top about in the maritime space, the gap between China's shipbuilding and our shipbuilding. That is true really across the board. And we spend a lot of time talking with the DoD and with Congress about ways to reform our acquisition system and to close the say-do gap between what DoD leaders are saying in terms of integrating uncrewed and autonomous systems and what they're actually doing. So we do that through congressional testimony, submitting ideas to the Hill on ways they can promote policy change within the Pentagon on the National Defense Authorization Act, which is something Congress passes annually, as well as on appropriations. And unfortunately, Congress has still not passed the fiscal year 2025 appropriations bill, even though we're almost halfway through into FY25 on the federal level. But we do have some really great things in there for funding for key programs like AFWERX, for the Defense Innovation Unit and the Replicator program, for the Remote Combat Vehicle and many other programs that we're very proud of. So we're hoping that in the next couple of weeks here, Congress will finally pass that FY25 appropriation. At the same time, we're working on now with Congress on FY26. So the fun never stops. And then the last thing I'll just talk about is our cybersecurity program. We launched that about 2 years ago. And this is really just an effort, again, to build more trust in our industry. Again, I spoke a little bit about how sometimes the enabling regulations are held up because the security rules are not necessarily entirely in place and the investments in security technology aren't there. The same is true on the cyber side. As a nation, we're not doing very well on cybersecurity. You can read the newspaper on any given day about the challenges in cybersecurity. And those same concerns and challenges translate into our industry as well. So our effort on cybersecurity through our Trusted Cyber program is really meant to raise awareness, educate, promote trust in systems, and in some cases actually certify systems as secure to federal standards. So that's something that we've been doing. We launched our Green UAS Cyber Certification program about a little over a year ago, in conjunction with the Pentagon's Defense Innovation Unit, as a commercial sort of alignment with their Blue UAS program. We're very proud of it, and we still got a long way to go, but it's really it's growing and it's providing a good service to our industry and to federal users both in the Pentagon and outside the Pentagon. So we're excited about the future growth of that program and the opportunity that provides. So I'm going to pause there. Plenty more things I could talk about, but I really want to take questions and also take a sip of water. So if there are questions, I defer to you on the best way to do that. Whether it,
I'll start. I'll start right away. It was interesting when you brought up how much we're relying on China for components. And there was a Bloomberg report on this, a Michael Bloomberg actually. Report. Did you see that? Did you get to see that?
Yep.
It was amazing. And do you remember the chart that he showed and how almost every component was going to China? And and it was really scary. And for him to come up and say that I was actually very proud of him. That actually brought this to light, and it really showed how much we, not only the United States, UK, other countries rely on these components for China. So the question is, how are we going to turn that around? We need government help. You and I have been talking about this for a year almost, Mike, when we were, Michael, when we were doing this, when we were on the trade show floor. How, what is it going to take for the government to really help us out? What is it really going to take?
Well, it's going to take a whole of nation effort, you know we have to really more than anything start doing and stop talking. And I think that's really what it comes down to. The Bloomberg report, I just put it in the chat, and there's another one from the Defense Innovation Board that I'll link to when I'm done speaking. Both lay out really good series of recommendations on how to start working on this. Um, but
Yeah.
more than anything, we have to invest in manufacturing domestically. We kind of got away from building things in this country, and we outsourced a lot of that. We don't have to do it all ourselves. We can rely on partners and allies as well. But we really do have to start onshoring a lot of the key components and building them here in the US. That includes batteries, that includes motors, that includes a lot of other things that go into uncrewed systems broadly, not just into drones. And you know, there's a lot of good ideas on how to do that in various reports. And now we just need Congress to take it seriously and fund some of these initiatives. And I mentioned earlier that, you know, there have been some success stories. I mean, the parallels between small UAS, for example, and solar panels are very similar. So you know, in the 2010s, China had about 80 to 90% of the global solar panel market. They were flooding the U.S. with inexpensive solar panels that were, you know, largely for roof installations, and they had strong supporters from the those that do home installations. They wanted to continue to have the low cost Chinese solar panels, but the Biden administration saw that, and as did Congress, as a risk to national security because we didn't have control over our own energy independence. And Congress passed the Solar Energy Manufacturers Act that provided tax incentives and loan guarantees and grants to juice American solar panel manufacturing. And since that time, I think that passed in maybe 21 or 22. You know, like dozens of factories have opened up in the U.S. Across the country. You know, from Ohio to Georgia, Michigan, Phoenix, or sorry, Arizona, to have onshored solar manufacturing. They couldn't have afforded to do that based upon without the government backing, because it's really hard to raise private capital when you have a Chinese competitor that's going to undercut you in the market. But when you have government, even just a little bit of government backing, it's a signal to private capital. It's okay it's safer to invest in these companies. Does it sound familiar? Sounds a lot like the drone industry. A lot of our member companies struggle to raise capital because they have Chinese competitors that consistently undercut them in the market. And when you've got that competition that isn't always on a level playing field, it's very hard to scale production and then bring down cost. It's very hard to stand up a battery manufacturing facility or a motor manufacturing facility outside of China when China can you know, produce the same products relatively on par on capability, but at, you know, a fraction of the cost. So that puts us at risk from both a hardware perspective as well as a software perspective. There are solutions that they're hard, and they require investment, but we think that, you know, with no one can out innovate the U.S. They can't outproduce us right now, but if we invest in manufacturing, we can be the world leader again.
Thank you, Mike. I only got one more question and then I'll open it up to others. And this is regards to New York City, especially. You know, and first question is, did you ever get to Schumer's office and try to correct his statement? That's the first question. Did you finally reach out to them?
Yeah, we had I didn't myself, but Max on our team, I know had a conversation with, I don't remember the name of the individual in Schumer's office, and you know, their response was, the boss says what the boss says. You know, it wasn't you know, they kind of shrugged it off as like this was just Schumer being Schumer.
Welcome to New York.
Yeah, you know, and of course he's notorious for you know, kind of going off the cuff and parroting the talking points of whoever he spoke to last. So I don't think it was an issue at the staff level. It was really just you know, just Schumer shooting from the hip at a press conference.
Yeah, and I know he does that a lot, and I've seen him do it. I live in New York. I've been in Penn Station. Sunday
Yeah.
morning, there's a camera. He was there Sunday mornings. It's amazing. But
He's got quite the reputation for that. Yeah.
yeah, yes, he does. But you know, I took it a little personally because Jennifer and I walked in there as a
Mhm.
result of the hard work that all you have done, right? Back, when was that? When was Hill Day? That was not last Hill Day, it was the Hill Day before. And we hit, Jen, unmute. You can unmute.
Just saying it was 2023.
Yeah. And it was like there was no time for us. And and then months later he becomes an expert. So so I'm very curious, and that's about what I thought.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
what are you doing with New York itself? It's like you got upstate New York and you got New York, New York, New York, right? And this Scott Harrigan, and I know this is where his guys are working, and that's their territory. You know, these guys need some real, I believe, really need help. And focus on the city itself. What can AUVSI do in the future? And do you have them on your agenda like you have been to other states and other big cities and been very successful with your uh, uh, um, courageous efforts? Scott Shockman included. All the you guys converged on the right places and made things happen. When are you going to come to New York and make things happen?
Yeah. Yeah, we go where we are going to find the most success, and I don't know offhand. I'll connect with Scott and Mason on what the opportunity looks like in New York. We went to Arizona. We focused on Arizona this year just because we were being a little opportunistic. We had a very motivated mayor of Phoenix who wants a vertiport and wants to sort of be the leader on that. So we tend to go to places where they're looking to lean in. I will say the current New York mayor has done a good job of publicizing the city's embrace of both aerial robotics as well as ground robotics for public safety. Some very high profile incidents or occasions of using like the Boston Dynamics Spot robot to go in and do search and rescue. They use Skydio drones for drones as a first responder programs throughout the city. I testified before the House Homeland Security Committee, along with the two individuals from the NYPD. We had a great conversation about New York City's public safety program. So I don't think there's really, at least from our perspective, any major challenges that we're aware of in New York. We were working with the FAA to try and get some of the TFRs pulled down. Over Brooklyn that Scott and I were talking about beforehand. Easy Aerial had reached out, and we were talking to the FAA about, hey, pull those down. They're not logical. And candidly, they weren't the ones calling the shots, really. So they didn't really have the authority that kind of came directly from higher echelons of government. But if there are specific things that we need to work on in New York, particular problems, points of friction, we can certainly pivot and surge resources there.
Scott Harrigan, hold on, Jennifer. Scott Harrigan, I'd like you to comment on that
Yeah.
because I think this is something
Yeah,
that
so all
you
great
certainly
stuff.
have in mind down here, and it's affected. He's a stakeholder, Michael. He's a
Yep.
stakeholder, and he's being affected. So this is important.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate your efforts to get those TFRs, or at least, instill some reason in those there. Can I ask a question? And it's okay if you don't know this or you're not sure. Those higher echelons, was that coming from the state or was that coming from a higher federal? So yeah, so
Yeah,
which
no, it was largely coming from Department of my sense was it was coming from the Department of Homeland Security leadership. They were getting beat up by Congress, for not having good answers on what was in the sky. And of course, the reason they didn't have good answers is because there weren't nefarious drones there in the first place. It was a lot of media hype, but nevertheless, they were kind of getting beat up. So the easy answer for them, and this is actually a good representative of a larger existential risk that our industry faces. The easy answer is just no drones, right? Like that's the easy button. And that's like one thing that, if people ask me like what keeps you awake at night, it's the fact that like, we all of us see the positive benefits of drones and we see the good that drones and autonomy bring. But if something really bad happens with the drone, the easy button is no drones, right? And we got very, very lucky in California with the drone that hit the airplane that was doing water application, that it wasn't a catastrophic incident. And I think had that occurred, you probably might have had a TFR over all of California, and that would have been obviously or worse. We are always at risk of of higher echelons of government just saying, you know what, no drones. Like, we're just going to be a drone-free country. I don't think that's a realistic thing that could happen, but you can't count it out either. And it's not something that, if there was a terrorist attack and some sort of a high-level threat using a swarm of drones or something like that, you know, not a lot we can do, other than just continue fortifying ourselves with good news stories and highlighting all the positive use cases, and then of course trying to advocate for policies that could help prevent that in the first place, whether it's through airspace awareness detection technology, certain cases, giving certain federal
I
authorities
want to jump,
technology.
Mike, I want to jump on that part right
Sure.
there. It's funny. Drone scanner, you can put it on your app, and if it has remote ID, it's going to catch it. There are apps out there that we can use.
Remote ID compliance is really low, though. That's a problem.
It is, and
Sure.
that is probably the biggest problem.
Yeah.
And so, I would have been curious if I was watching these drones in New York. I would have pulled out my phone and see who had remote ID up there.
Right.
And it would have been an interesting fact, that say, hey, we're not playing by the rules. So how do we make it better? So,
Yeah.
that's kind of interesting. And you're right, who's playing by the rules? And
Yes.
even good people don't even know the rules.
When I was at ALPA, there was a real issue with people shining lasers into the flight deck of aircraft landing around the country. And we worked with the FBI and encouraged the FBI to make some high profile arrests and to really throw the book at people, make an example out of them. And for a long time, that you just didn't hear about that anymore. They did. They arrested some people. They persecuted them. They sent them to jail for a long time with hefty fines, because you could really damage someone's eyes. You could, or potentially worse, disorient a pilot and cause an accident. So they made an example out of some people, and then people stopped doing that. And I think we're at the point now where it would be useful for the federal government to make some examples out of some bad actors. Maybe not necessarily somebody who's not flying with remote ID, but certainly somebody who's flying a drone, over a wildfire that collides with an aircraft. Like, you've got to find these people and make an example out of them. And we're hopeful that the FBI ultimately finds the operator of that drone and throws the book at him a little bit, makes an example of him, as well as others that violate TFRs at stadiums to get photos of football games and shut down the football game. I think that happened at least twice this year, or other sporting events or big events like that. So I think that's certainly one way of helping to enforce rules that sometimes are otherwise ignored.
Yeah. Two, just more, all in the same vein. Two quick things just coming from the New York side that we're running into is, as you mentioned, NYPD has some great stories, all positive stuff, and we're happy to see that. A big struggle in New York is NYPD controls drone permits too. So NYPD is free to use drones for all these fantastic uses, and then us commercial operators in New York, we had to sue the city. I'm sure you're aware of this. A few colleagues of mine and a whole coalition of people, drone pilots, successfully sued New York City over it. Over their essential drone ban, just over how they enforce drones. And, that's getting us a permit. That permit, I would still say, is the most difficult in all of the United States, save for Washington, D.C. And I would say the Washington, D.C. one is that way for a very good reason. We're not really as confident that the New York City one is there for as good a reason. It's not as much of a national security issue like there is D.C. And, the NYPD, this covers a warehouse in Staten Island that we want to, do a mapping flight for a surveying firm as much as it covers Times Square. So, New York City is a unique beast, and we're still working with that. The permit has been a huge step forward, but it still takes, we're the private operators, I think, are the ones who are still under the most pressure and have the most difficulty operating here, which is difficult because it's a big part of the economy, and that includes the whole film industry too, right? New York City's got film permits that they'll issue, but the drone complicates stuff there. But I will add on that same note, just one other quick thing. Has there been any talk of of grants for private, companies to be able to procure US made drones? Because yeah, it's something we're running into. The public safety adopts it quite easily because there are very distinct grants there. But and this could just be I don't know what's out there, but we haven't seen that on like the end for like engineering, mapping, surveying, all of that.
Mm.
And that's a huge, that's probably the single biggest revenue generating market in New York State when it comes to drones. I mean, I was just at the
It's probably the
land.
biggest nationally, frankly.
Yeah, I was
Um,
just at the Professional Land Surveyors Conference up in near Syracuse, New York, which was this past week, and I couldn't tell you. I felt like 80% of the people I talked to operate drones for mapping and surveying, which was
That's
incredible.
awesome. That's great. Yeah. There's nothing in law yet. There are some proposals that AUVSI supports that would be focused on demand generation for people to transition off of their unsecured Chinese drones to other platforms. They don't have to be US, but just from not from China. And none of those have become law yet. I think we're working with a couple of offices right now to reintroduce some legislation this Congress that's a little bit more carefully crafted that we hope we can find strong support for this year to get that into law. Probably not as a standalone bill, but probably attached to something else like the NDAA or the reconciliation bill or something. So we're working on that, and we see a couple of distinct user groups that need need funding for this, including, as you mentioned, public safety, but also agriculture is a huge segment as well. That's another one where we believe that there's like 8,000 to 10,000 drones doing agricultural spraying across the country right now. Surveying, mapping, as you mentioned, and then infrastructure inspection as well. Beyond that, so like water, electrical, utility, pipelines. There's a lot of drones being used for those as well. So there's probably others, but those are sort of the key buckets that we've identified as the areas of immediate focus.
Michael, if there is a legacy that this board would like to leave for New York, is have AUVSI really get involved with New York and really try to help them bring the concerns of Scott Harrigan. And how about young adults studying aviation want to get into the business in New York and they're having problems? They come right out of school, they're ready to go. They have degrees in this stuff and they can't work in their own backyard with all this. So it is something that if we can ask AUVSI, right, that really start looking at the channels to start making that change somehow in New York. It's not for us now, although it would be great. It's our future. It's our future kids that are trying to get in there and look for people like Scott, look for people like you, look for the people that are on this phone today as mentors. But you got to give them a chance. And if they're going to get slapped as soon as they come out of college, we have aviation colleges here. We got the biggest colleges in the world, and we can't fly drones. So you see, it's almost an oxymoron. So I think what I'm asking, and I feel I have support on this, if this can start that, figure out a way, even with the new board that comes on, a way to help us down here, which can possibly be a blueprint for other hardcore cities that you come involved with.
Yeah.
If you could do it, if New York can do it, then why can't we do it here?
Yeah.
So it's something that I'm bringing up to put in your head for the future to help people today like Scott and the future of our children tomorrow.
Absolutely. Thank you, John.
So I think I'm going to do what Eagles view a little bit, and just many people, like I was not originally from the area, and upstate New York, Syracuse, Rochester, and Buffalo are part of a federal regional innovation hub. And what I'm wondering is if we could take a look at AUVSI nationally and see where are the pockets of those innovation hubs and connect them. One of the things, again, I'm kind of representing industry with a company that's in defense that is, working on a prototype that would love much more support. But I'm just wondering how we could create a directory, how these innovation hubs across the nation can somehow, how can we find out where are the members in that area? And industry directory, like, are there suppliers? I've seen some really beautiful industry directories that are, and I know, like, you have so many constituents and so many verticals in it that I'm very compassionate about it. So like, one is, how can we connect the innovators across sectors, using A-frame, like the federal regional hubs as an example. And then I actually invited a friend on the call, Andre. How can we, does AUVSI have a collective storytelling strategy where we can input good stories that, like, you have a distribution network. As a startup, we don't really have a very big distribution network, and we've got great stories. We can source great stories, and we just would love to know how to get great stories out there and even help tell other regions' stories.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I don't know that we do have sort of like a information sharing sort of mechanism right now, but I'll talk to the team about setting that up, and maybe it's something as simple as a Teams channel or a Slack channel or something, where the chapters and national can all share ideas and then what to highlight. That's a great suggestion. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you.
I like that a lot.
Thumbs up.
Anybody else on, I'm going to open it up to the floor now. All you need to do is introduce yourself to Michael. Anybody has other questions?
Yeah,
George, go right ahead. I see you,
Hi.
George.
hi, Michael. Nice to virtually meet you here. I've worked with AUVSI over the years, and with New Air in New York State. I'm going to make comments instead of questions. My comments are that the industry is fighting over policy and regulation, and you've got an FAA. You're saying that nobody's home right now. The speed of those policies don't keep up with the speed of technology. The other thing that I would comment on is right now the drone industry, as far as drone manufacturers in the United States, and I would say all of North America right now, including Canada, there's a huge convergence of these companies where they can't make it on their own. They're starting to condense into a group of companies working together to try to keep alive. The industry went through, I think, a lot of serious challenges, both prior to and then during the COVID events that happened. The Exponential conference that was supposed to take place in Boston was canceled.
The best show that ever happened. Yeah.
Right. And exactly, especially for all of us up in this region. I work with law enforcement and public safety and the military for what I do. Drones at one point was a big part of what I did. I brought a company from Finland here to the United States and brought them to Syracuse and made them part of the New Air ecosystem and Center State CEO, which helps get economic development money and all this going. I just think that in the amount of technology that's coming out of China at the speed that it comes out of China, and the regulations over here, and like they want to shut down, DJI drones being flown by public safety, then who's going to save your house from burning down or stop your car from getting stolen or whatever if you don't have the drones in the air? A lot of things just don't make sense. I think there's too much disinformation in the public side and in the news, feeds that come out. The idea that the drones were as big as an SUV flying through the sky, and how high were they flying? Were they flying over 400 feet? Did they have waivers to fly an SUV over 400 feet? I didn't see anybody, claiming to get one. So then the other thing then with DJI taking geofencing out of their software, that was another big deal. Except the fact that the same TFRs that we've got marked up, across, the states right now were already previously marked up, let's say, in DJI's geofencing application. Then what they do is they take TFRs and they're basically identifying all the critical infrastructure that you're trying to protect and putting that out in public so that everybody knows where the critical infrastructure is. So I think that there's a lot of different competing ways of thinking in this whole thing. And I think it's an industry that's struggling to find a spot. And I think that the more that the regulation and let's say prohibitive ways of looking at things is happening, it's going to cause more problems than it's going to fix. I don't see China as our best friend. I don't want to see things go that way. But the things that's going on there, they're being basically subsidized by the Chinese government to be able to create drones that are high technology and low cost, and they're ubiquitous. Everybody's got them right now. Most of the counter drone capability right now is also being supplied using technology that looks at just DJI drones because there's so many of them. So it's like the horse is out of the barn. The regulations don't meet the need, and I don't think enough people know enough about it to understand what the real challenges to the industry, and like what John was just saying, kids coming out of school and they can't find a place to work or a place to fly. I don't know how you fix that in the short term. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah. No, I appreciate it. Thank you. And I think the short answer is there's no short-term fix. It's gonna these are hard challenges that you raised. But I never bet against American innovation and American people, and I think we'll rise to the challenge. And with the hard work collective of all of us, we'll overcome them. And I'm confident that in just a couple of years, we've made so much progress in the last couple of years, particularly coming out of COVID, that we'll look back at this challenging time and feel really good about the progress we've made, both on the regulatory side, in terms of the enabling regulations, as well as on the scaling manufacturing side. I think that is an area that definitely requires a lot more attention. I think we're getting close on the regulation side. We still have some hurdles, but we've got a long way to go on the manufacturing side for sure.
Yeah, Michael, I'm glad you're busy. I hope that all your good work goes, and comes to a success here, because I really think that the education of the public to what the drone industry is just isn't out there. People don't understand, what the value of having that drone in the air is going to do for them if they're in a car accident or their boat is sinking out in New York Harbor or whatever it is. Drones are going to come to their rescue if they like it or not. And then
Part of that because the enabling regulations aren't there, so they don't see them, and that was kind of the whole issue with New Jersey. It's like, oh, there's a drone up there; it must be doing something nefarious. They didn't.
Right.
They don't default to, there's a drone up there; it's just conducting a mission. It's just doing a job.
Right.
And because they're still so unique. Now, if you live in North Texas in the Dallas area, it's not anymore, because there are drone operations occurring by the hundreds each day, doing delivery of prescription medication and consumer goods from Walmart and DoorDash and other things like that, because they've worked with the FAA to sort of create this test site. They call it the key site that I mentioned earlier. When that becomes the norm, we won't be having the same conversation. People need to see something and get comfortable with it. It's just like with Waymo. It was very exciting when I was in that autonomous vehicle for the first 5 minutes or so. I FaceTimed my wife. I took some videos and pictures. It was awesome. And then it just sort of became commonplace, and I started checking email because it was just like any other car, just didn't have a human piloting it. I think we'll get to that place with drones, operating around the country as well. But we need the enabling regulations in place so people just become used to it and become it's just part of everyday life. And we'll get there, but we got some work to do.
So it's Patrice McCullough.
Trace.
Thanks for all you're doing. It's amazing. Two things I want to identify is that you can't we have a plethora or saturation of pilots coming out of either high school or college with no place to go, as we've all chatted in and what I've heard, right? I think a huge gap that we have that people tend to overlook is you can't take a tool and throw it in an industry if the person doesn't understand the industry. And for example, the public safety end of things, right? You can't take your pilot's license without being trained and have some kind of apprentice or oversight in an industry to say, okay, this is where I want to use it. You can't do it for construction either. And you can't do it for a lot, mapping and surveying. Mapping and surveying, you have to the federal graphic data geospatial standards that are in place in order to have mapping and surveying to matter and have credibility, have to follow those standards, right? So mapping and surveying require an understanding of the industry. You can take photographs, which are separate and apart from the actual imagery that is collected and has to meet absolute engineering standards from a geospatial context. So I think, and that's something I've been talking a lot to different people about, is making sure that these pilots who are essentially, being trained as a pilot to do something in an industry, much like military, lots of other applications. And I don't think that we're doing a great job of understanding, of explaining the importance of having an industry in which to use a tool. The second part of that that I wanted to mention, so I'm trying to figure out, and I'm trying to, where people are really making money. And from what I'm finding, people are not making money, very little money, unless you're in very highly specialized and you're, doing something on the public safety side, you're doing something, but that's really, that's a public thing. So one of the things an effort I'm trying to move forward is get more realization from the federal, state, and local entities to understand that they can use a contract, right, to be able to do mass contracts to do simple things like infrastructure inspections. But again, that has to, depending upon what you're doing and the context of it, you may need to have the data that, is under a civil engineer or something of the sort in order to quantify and qualify that data.
Patrice, these are all good points. I agree with you. I know that, I've spoken for, by the way, Patrice is one of the people in AUVSI chapters. And I've heard her say this before, and she makes some great points. One of the difficulties that I see, Michael, that we're having on as far as boots on the ground, is having the time where we have volunteers now, right? That are having the time to get to Huntington. It's not my area, to get to Oyster Bay. Scott and I have done this. We have actually went to the governments, and we have permits, and we can have recreational drones fly. We can have commercial drones fly. They've got to get the permits, and they go to the town hall and get them. And so it's easy, but it's not that easy, because there is such a disconnect of this tool that Patrice is talking about that can really help a lot of people. So how does AUVSI get to the bigger picture where it's, I guess it's from the state down to the municipalities, how the state can lead and get that information to the municipalities in their own state. And I think that's something that AUVSI might be able to handle in the future if it was really looked at. We really need an effort to reach the state and then trickle down to its municipalities.
Absolutely.
That's something I'll put on the agenda and figure out how we can do that.
John, give me a quick second. I'm actually working on something that I can hope to make a template of it that could actually work for communities and for people, even for the chapters, that could actually mean something that takes it out of the hands of the AUVSI corporate, given the bandwidth that they have and what they can do. But if I can build it, and then present it to everybody with AUVSI and say, here's an opportunity in which you can educate them through this, through this three-step method, really, to make it very, very simple. So I'll leave it at that.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Patrice. Go ahead, Jennifer.
No, I was just excited. Nadeem Syed, as someone that I just met from a different region, and I'm so excited he's on the call because he's really interested in participating and kind of finding a chapter. So I'd love you to have the floor and ask Michael any questions that you have.
Hey, Nadeem, good to see you again.
Michael. Yeah, Michael and I spoke, Jennifer. So first of all, I think this is my first time here, but it's good to see folks just openly talking about their issues and opportunities and all of that stuff. So I look forward to being engaged. I think, I've taken on a role for a new startup. We're pulling it together. I told Jennifer we're in a little bit stealth mode at the moment. But in the future, I would love to come in and tell you what we're doing, and I'd love to stay engaged. And we're based in New York as well, and it's good to see that there's a community here that I can lean on. So really appreciate the introduction, Jennifer, and getting me here is great. And as always, Michael, it's great to hear your thoughts too. So
Thank you, Nadeem. Thank you so much. Is there anybody else?
Michael, thanks so
Okay.
much for your time this evening. I'm Jason Anderson. I've been with this group now for a while. I'm a meteorologist that's been consulting and working with a lot of drone companies. Great talk tonight. I'm now working in government, and something that I'm really frustrated with, and I would really encourage you to work with the FAA and the regulations side is, this regulation is going to come out hopefully sooner than later, maybe this year, maybe early next year. But I think they're going to miss the forest for the trees. They're going to write something very narrow and not focused enough. And what I mean by that is looking at whether, I'll bounce back to something George and Patrice were saying, some of their things around the regulations, but also the business case. Okay, let's say we get the regulation that allows the companies to fly. Well, if it just says in the terms of weather, look at the weather, that's not specific enough. But if you write it too stringently, then they get confused. And what you want to do is create some kind of regulation in a balance where you're balancing public safety and the safety of the drone, but also ensuring efficiency. And I think that's one thing that gets lost a lot here. People come to me and be like, I want to fly drones. I want to do something in the agricultural area. I want to do something around drone delivery. I want to do something around inspection, public safety. But, what does look at the weather mean? I can look out my window, but everyone here knows in Syracuse and Rochester, a 2-mile difference in town is the difference between snow and heavy, and rain, or a clear sunny day and light winds. I don't know if FAA's taken a look at those things hard enough. And I'll tell you from my side now, working in the National Weather Service now a year and a half, we're flying drones into hurricanes. We collected vital data for Helene and Milton this year, along with drones on the ocean surface. We caught a 40-foot wave in the Gulf from Milton about 24 hours before that stuff came into Tampa. And it very much changed the messaging we were giving to the public about how to, get out of Tampa and things like that. And we know how to do these kinds of drones and ops. FAA doesn't talk to us in the Weather Service. And, we can't get out there and help, every single business or every single municipality EM about how to be using drones and how to integrate the weather in such a way that, okay, the regulation's written, go ahead and fly. We don't want drones to come out of the sky due to weather, due to icing, wind, what have you. And then that's going to create another fiasco like what happened in New Jersey this year. I mean, literally, I was holding my breath for that whole thing saying, here it comes. And, you remember the story in the 70s with the helicopters, a couple bad helicopter crashes and that stuff, shut that down for a decade or more. I keep saying this in government, people roll their eyes at me. We need to stop playing catch up and start leading. And I would charge you, we're trying to do that here on our side here at AUVSI, but we need to do that more to them. FAA needs to be leading this, not impeding it, not playing catch up, because the Chinese, the Europeans, you name it, are going to pass us. They are passing us, and we need to start getting ahead. And whether it's people like us, for you talking to them, whether getting them to talk to other people in government, or just talking to the users and the people that are going to be serving customers and doing these jobs and saying, look, we don't want to hamstring you, but we want to give you some guidance so that you can be effective. I think that's just some of the things I would say here. It's about safety and efficiency. That's my bottom line.
I appreciate your comments and your concerns about the rule and how much weather is a factor or is not a factor and how the FAA handles it. Certainly willing to work with you on there will be a comment period when the rule comes out, the draft rule, and probably 60 to 90 days where the FAA will collect comments. There will be a lot of untechnical comments, but they will be really looking for the technical comments and the feedback as to how to take what they spent 3 years writing, 2.5 years writing after the ARC report was delivered to sort of perfect what they wrote into becoming a final rule. So that will be the important time for you and others in the industry to work either collectively through AUVSI and or independently for your own purposes to get that information to the FAI to help them do themselves, help them improve the rule. So that we
That's
will
good
have
to know. And yeah, and please push that where you can. And obviously things in the government are a little weird right now, so I don't know what NOAA can do, but at least on the consulting side of it, I do on the side still. I know some folks that would love to add some comments there, because there are some times where, look, companies do want guidance. They
Yeah.
do want to know what the rules are, not just have it be the Wild West, because they don't want to be the ones with the egg on their face if something happens.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, yeah. And and in the letter that I sent today to the Office of Management Budget, that was essentially the point. Is like we are one of those instances where we want the rules. So there's a lot of industries that are seeking deregulation right now. We're the opposite. We want the enabling regulations because we can't operate in a lot of
Right.
cases.
If you
without
turn it
that.
into Wild West, something bad's going to happen
Right.
far too quickly, and then it's going to set us back a decade or more.
Concur.
Thanks, Jason.
Thanks, Jason.
Go ahead, Jennifer.
Circle Optics, Ian, our Chief Operating Officer, is on the call, and we are beginning to do some lobbying in Washington, and I'm sure he's going to have some things to say about it. How can we also engage AUVSI when we're there? Like, we have a Sherpa that's kind of guiding us through the process, but I feel like there's this untapped resource to actually meet and greet people, even like you, when Ian and Zach are in Washington. Ian, would you like to chime in? Perhaps.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, thanks for coming in and giving the talk. I found it really interesting. As Jen kind of described there, we're really looking at, with our company, trying to get to the next step, which is getting beyond sitters and sitters and getting some like larger dollars allocated for what we're working on. And we're just trying to learn how to do that. So.
Yeah. So, just communicate when you're coming down. We can certainly meet up. We can, come to the office. We can meet for, a meal or just have a meeting. We can talk about your specific priorities and how they align with things we may be working on or vice versa. And if there are things that you're advocating for that are broader than just to your company, but for, things that are sort of for the whole industry or could be available to the whole industry, we can certainly be a force multiplier for your request as well and help you. We also, help open doors for members that are trying to get access to particular Hill offices or regulatory agency offices, maybe running into struggles. So we can help with that as well.
Thank you.
Yep.
Great.
Thanks.
Anybody else?
Well, John,
Should we
thank you
go-
so much for the opportunity to join. It's been a terrific 90 minutes or so. I've learned a lot, and I appreciate the opportunity to have a two-way dialogue with the Empire chapter and your fantastic members. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.